Hey class, today we're going to go over beams. I'm not going to focus on beams in the theory class. This is the only time we're going to talk about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot a series of 3, 4, maybe even 5. We'll see how today goes. Short videos, and then at the end in your e-learn content portion, you're going to see a homework assignment with regards to answering questions about the beams. So what you might want to do right now is go print out the assignment or pull it up on your computer. It's just a Word document, and then fill it out as we go along. That way you finish the video, finish your homework at the same time. Okay, this is the only time we're going to cover beams, so try and pay close attention and get good notes. Okay. First and foremost, what is the function of a beam? In a nutshell, a beam replaces a wall in any house. So if we have a concentrated load from above, if I have, the best example is a floor joist here and a floor joist that butts into it there because I can't get lumber long enough to span the entire distance. I have a couple of options. I could put a wall to support that underneath, but then I've divided the space below these floor joists into 2 rooms, and I may not want 2 rooms. So in lieu of a wall, I can simply put a beam. All right, carry the beam on either end and carry the beam on intermediate supports throughout, and I can have now 1 big room rather than 2. That in a nutshell is the reason that we have beams. Beams eliminate walls. Therefore, as a renovator, beams are really important to us. Understanding the different types of beams, built-up wood beams, steel I-beams, and engineered beams, and how we can use these to our advantage, and when it is appropriate to use one or the other style will help you out as a renovator, because one of the biggest things you're going to do in a house is take out walls. All right, as a renovator, that's our #1 job. So what supports a beam? Okay, we're going to focus up here on the screen. I've got the Ontario Building Code open to page 149. And we're going to be looking at beams to support floors, and that is 9.23.8. Beams shall have an even level bearing and shall be not less than 89 millimeters, which is 3.5 inches in length of bearing at the end supports, except as required in the notes in tables A8 through A11. Okay, so we got a bit of information here that the code book's given us. #1, that they need to be supported at both ends. It's not much of a beam if it's not supported at both ends. #2, that each end has to have 3.5 inches of bearing. This is a lot bigger than what we've talked about in class so far. Ceiling joists require 1.5 inches. Floor joists require 1.5 inches. Rafters require 1.5 inches. Lintels require 1.5 inches of bearing at each end. Now we're dealing with a beam. Beams are going to require 3.5 inches. And it has to be level. It's got to be a nice bearing point. All right? We don't want to have a crappy bearing point. And where does this come into play? This comes into play with foundations. You can create a beam pocket in a foundation wall. If your concrete former or yourself doesn't do a nice job of creating the beam pocket, it won't carry the entire load of the beam at either end. So that's why they get a little bit fussy with that on that particular sentence. Okay? Moving down that page, we have our first type of beam. So we'll come back over here. And we'll look at a couple of different types of beams that are available to us. The first one, and maybe the most popular still, is a built-up wood beam. All right, we're going to go over the tables in the code book where these beams can be made up of, but this particular one here is a 2x6 beam. Now typically in your house you're going to see 2x8s and 2x10s used, but for display purposes this gets it across. This is 1 ply in a beam, and 1 ply does not a beam make. If it's 1 ply, then it's just a floor joist. If you've got 2 plies, it's likely a trimmer or a header in a floor system, but as soon as we put that 3rd layer into it, it's going to be started to be considered a beam. All right, and this is important because I need 1.5 inches bearing for doubled up trimmers and doubled up headers. I need 1.5 inches bearing for lintels. But as soon as I have that third ply in there, we're going to start to consider this a beam, and therefore I need to treat each end a bit differently. In our Ontario Building Code, we're going to see that built-up wood beams will start at 3 layers, 4 layers, and go all the way up to 5 layers for a built-up wood beam. The next most popular beam that you're going to encounter in residential construction is this guy here, a steel I-beam. And in the code book, these are known as wide flange beams because it has a wide upper and lower flange with a narrow web joining them in between. So when you look up in the code book and you see a W beside the beam's name, it's a steel beam, and the W refers to the wide flange. So don't look for I-beams in your code book. Next, you're going to find engineered wood beams. This particular one is an LVL, laminated veneer lumber, and this one is from the Boise broadleaf family of beams. You can get LVLs, you can get paralams. You're not going to find any information on these guys in the code book. These are an engineered wood product. Like engineered floor joists, you have to go to the manufacturers and follow their tables and guidelines as far as spans and that for these beams. So, beams, the function of a beam replaces a wall, right? And what was the function of the wall? Was to carry the load from above, okay? Beams are carrying loads from above. Beams can be used in houses to support floor joists, to support ceiling joists, to support the ridge, and then also you can use beams in houses to support masonry on the outside of a house. If we wanted to carry masonry through a roof system, we can put up a steel beam and we can have the masonry resting on the beam. Those are the main functions of a beam in the house. Why would we choose to put a beam in? We would put a beam in where we don't want to have a wall. Or, if we want to eliminate a wall, we'll come back and put a beam in its place. Beams are supported at either end by at least 3.5 inches. Either end of that beam is now going to be considered a point load. Point loads, as you know, need to be carried all the way through the house in one straight line, all the way through the house down to the foundation. Where a wall can sit on floor joists and be offset from a wall below it by 2 feet, beams can't. Your point loads have to go all the way through. So if you're going to start taking walls out in houses, you have to start thinking about how you're going to chase that point load all the way down to the foundation and the footing, okay? When we come back, we're going to talk about support for beams, and we're going to break it up into talking about each specific beam category, mainly the built-up wood beam and the steel beam, where to find the information in the code book, and how to interpret it. Okay? We'll see you in the next video.